All right, here we are. I normally start off with a question, and most of us fit into two different categories. I guess this isn't really a question, but ones who are kind of born lucky. Maybe you have family members that are rich or just fantastic parents. But most of us fall in the second category where we're kind of like we have to make our own luck. And, it's normally through grit, determination, and fueled by our own desires and our own dreams. And we're going to talk today about a story about somebody that had to do just that. But first of all, we're going to introduce our guest today. It's Melissa Guzetta. How are you today?
Good, thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
She owns a computer company. She's owned it since 97, correct? Is it
Yeah,
97?
yeah, 98, I think,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been so long ago. Who cares? She owns a computer company called the Computer Tutor. Her website is computertutornews.com.
It's
And she
actually
offers.
computertutortraining.com,
Oh, is it really?
computertutortraining.com, yeah.
Oh, well, I
Well,
had
because I
that.
have a new website and anyway, so it doesn't use that Computer Tutor News anymore, so
Oh, I
yeah.
see. Okay, well, we'll go over that again at the end, don't let me forget. Um,
Okay.
but she offers computer, employee training, executive training on Microsoft, all that stuff, and even the basics. If you're new to computing, if you're new to the internet, she will, take you through all the basic steps, and I think most everything is virtual right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, there's no one-on-one like she used to do, and
Yeah.
maybe after the first of the year, things will get better, who knows? But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're gonna talk to her about her book. She wrote a book, when was that? 2014?
2015.
15. And, her book is called Private Lucky. Great title, great title. Tell us a little about that title and what it's about.
Okay, Private Lucky is the true story of a friend of mine, Hank Gillibard. And we had heard, by we, I mean my late partner, Dave Morton. W- he worked with the guy's wife, whose name is Lola, and she's amazing herself.
Yeah.
And um, Lola would tell us about, how Hank had this interesting story, but that was all it was to us at first. Just these rumors that he had this interesting life. And one day we offered to videotape him telling his story for his family. And that's when we started actually hearing his story. And we were amazed. I mean, it was jaw dropping. We were like, wow, this like needs to be a movie. Have you ever thought about writing your story? And he said, well, I can't write. And I said, why don't you let me try it then? And that's how it all got started. And I said, I'll try writing this book for you. I hadn't written a book before other than training materials, which is totally different.
I would imagine.
And so and it took me a while. It took me a number of years to finally get through it because, of course, I'm still working and just trying to write in between and, getting feedback on my writing and all that kind of stuff. And I just kept crafting it and crafting it. I wanted it to be um, worthy of public consumption. I wanted people to really enjoy the story the way we had. And so I finally got it out and it's
That's
gotten a
awesome.
lot of great reviews and I've been happy about that.
That's awesome. I hadn't read any reviews. Actually, I did read a couple on your Facebook page, on the Private Lucky Facebook page, and that's
Oh,
there's
yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to glean from that too. It's really really good stuff.
Yeah.
So what is this story? I mean, he's from the era of World War II. I mean, he was
Right.
from. So
Yeah.
tell us through some of his early years. What was
Well,
his?
so the really interesting uh, twist in his story, it's right from birth. There's a twist going on in there because his family was from Holland, but they were living in Detroit when he was born. So his family had come
Okay.
over to the U.S. and they were living in the Detroit area. Hank was born in Detroit, therefore he's American, but he was only 2 years old when the family moved back to Holland. So he grew up in Holland. So culturally and everything, he was Dutch.
Language
And,
wise.
yeah, and language wise and everything, and grew up there in Europe. And then, just in time for World War II and the Nazi occupation of Holland, is when, as he was going into his teen years. And so then he starts, you would think, because he was not Jewish, you would think that, I mean, everybody, it was horrible for everybody at the time, of course,
Yeah.
but you would think that the fact that he wasn't Jewish would make it slightly less horrible, right?
You would think.
You would think, but as it turns out, because he was born in the US, he was circumcised. And if you were
Ah.
circumcised, you were presumed to be Jewish. And so he keeps getting in trouble with, he, like, basically schoolmates would turn him in because they would get rewarded for turning in schoolmates and things like that,
Ah.
as being Jewish. And so a couple of times, once he almost got hauled off to a concentration camp. And then he had other troubles where people would ask him about it, and and so he kept having trouble. So his father took him out of one school, put him in another school, and but he continued to have problems. Plus, on top of that, it was a rule that 16-year-old boys had to report to work for Germany. And not only did he not want to do that, but obviously with a circumcision, that wasn't going to work for him. So his father said, "You're going to have to go into hiding, son." And he was the only one in his family that had to go into hiding. And
Oh.
he was in hiding from age 16 to 18. And it was obviously managed by the resistance, because he would, even though he would tell me that he didn't know that for sure, but to me it's pretty obvious because he was
Yeah.
moved around a lot, and people from the resistance would come give them warnings occasionally if they had information, or sometimes provide a little bit of food or food rations and that kind of thing. And so it kind of tells me that his being in hiding was, he had to move around a lot during the time he was in hiding, and he
Sure.
got moved from city to city. He had to go by a different name in each place.
Mm.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that whole
16
moving
to
target
18. Can
thing.
you imagine what you were doing age 16 to 18? I was having a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was too.
So-
And I don't think other guys were checking to see whether I was circumcised either. That's kinda weird, you know?
I know, it's very weird. And they checked.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
just so weird.
Yeah, and the time that he got hauled off to a, well, he actually did get hauled off, but he only got as far as this area where they were detained, and they were going to be put on a train to go to a concentration camp when he got rescued from a family friend. But he actually had to go to the principal's office, and what they demanded that he pull down his pants.
Mm-mm-mm.
Yeah.
Goodness
And
gracious. It's
yeah.
such a it seems like hundreds of years ago, but it really it was 80
Yeah.
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Incredible.
I know, it's
Incredible.
crazy. Yeah, and
So
so
he
we wanted to get his story. I believe in general that these stories from World War II are really important. And of course, so many of those veterans are dying now,
every
and people
day,
from
yeah.
that era who were actually witness to the things that happened, especially in Nazi occupied countries. And I just felt like it was important to get his story. And then the other thing about this story, though, that also makes it unique is that it's not just a World War II story. That's like just the first third of the book, because the
Mhm.
rest of it are his crazy adventures of trying to become a pilot. Because he's like one of these people from the time he was a little kid, he knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to become a pilot, and there was just nothing that was going to stop him from becoming a pilot. But all this stuff kept getting in the way, like having to hide from Nazis and so on. And his education got interrupted as well as part of that, right? Because he had to leave school to go
And
into
move
hiding.
around.
And
Yeah.
so he never got a real diploma. He ended up getting a diploma, but it wasn't really a real one. It was sort of a real one, but not really.
This is part of
And
making your own luck here, right?
you're right, yeah,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. So then I mean, and obviously he survives the war and comes back from hiding. And there's a lot of great stories in there on how he got a diploma, and some just like a lot of stories about what he experienced being in hiding. And then there's a story that there's a story about a teacher of his that he had a contentious relationship with that is just so that's like the story that when I read it still, I cry when I read it.
Oh, no.
It's yeah, and he cried when I read it to him. Yeah, it was an amazing story about him helping out this teacher. But anyway, he survives the war and all, and ends up his father gets him into the American Army right after the war ends. So in that way, he was lucky.
Oh, there you go,
Right? To
yeah.
have been in the army during the war would have been probably kind of deadly.
Sure, sure.
And, so, right after the war, like 1945 wasn't even over with yet by the when he was in the army.
Yeah.
So, the war ended in May 1945, at least, for Holland.
For yeah.
And, and he was by December, he was, in the army. So he's still considered a World War II veteran. So I think,
Oh, because it was still going on in the Pacific.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yes.
get it, I get it,
And,
yeah.
so he served in the American zone in Germany. So again, he's not in the US. He's in the American Army, but he's in Germany. And so he's but he can speak German. And so actually some of the guys really appreciated that because then he could talk with the girls and, that kind of thing. So and
Now he was
so
in the American Army, but he didn't speak English, is that
and
correct?
he didn't speak English,
Oh
right,
my
and so this
gosh.
causes a lot of funny and it becomes hilarious because he just, keeps like, right off the bat when he arrives at boot camp, there's this who's on first kind of exchange almost with the, drill sergeant, and, and it's because his father had sort of drilled into Hank how to say his name to, to somebody and spell it out, and he
Mm,
kept
mm-mm.
trying to do that, and there was this misunderstanding with this sergeant, and it just goes back and forth, and it's so funny. Yeah, it's hilarious.
Well, it's obviously a charmed life so far, even up to that point. Like you said, he joins us right at the end of all the stuff going on in the Europe. So yeah.
Right,
Wow,
and,
that's a
but he's really, frustrated because his hope was that he was gonna learn how to fly once he went into the army, and now the Dutch army had called him, and he was
oh,
fine with that because, again, he wanted to fly. So he thought, "Great, the Dutch army will teach me to fly." But the now Holland was still involved in a conflict with Indonesia, right? They had, like, colonies in the Indonesian area,
I was not
theater.
aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and, so there was he would have probably had to serve there, and his father had dreams of going back to the US someday, so he really wanted to nurture that US citizenship that he had in his household,
Sure.
and so he said, "No, no, no, son, you're not going to the, Dutch army, we're gonna get you in the American army." So he took him down there, and as a matter of fact, even to take the test to get into the army, like, he had to take a test. Well, he didn't speak English, so he was having trouble with that. He could do the math portion, so he did the math portion without any problem, tried to turn that in, and the guy said, "You didn't answer all the rest of the questions." And so they had to find somebody in there who could speak either Dutch or Flemish or German, because he could speak all 3 of those
Oh my
languages.
gosh.
They found someone who spoke Flemish, and so that lady helped interpret the questions, and, then boom, he was in the army. Yeah.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
yeah.
So he was enlisted at that point, and I think you have to be an officer. At least back when I was in, you had to be an officer in order to fly. How did that work?
Well, unfortunately, they stopped pilot training as soon as the war was over.
Of course.
Right. So he was frustrated once again, and I mean, so mad that he almost went AWOL. He was just like ready to walk off base and said, "I want to become a pilot." And especially because after boot camp, that was when he was hoping he would get assigned to an air base. And so he got through boot camp okay. And it was after that when they put out the assignments, and they tried to assign him to a guard group, and having nothing to do with flying.
Oh,
And he got very angry and he tried to storm off. And so he ended up getting thrown in the brig for that. And this lieutenant, who apparently you could tell lieutenant kind of thought highly of him, but still had to act like a lieutenant.
sure.
And he was like, Hank, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. And Hank has just said, I was told I was going to be able to fly. And they told that was when they broke the news to him that we don't do pilot training anymore. The war is over, and we have other stuff that we're doing. And so the best he was able to get was to be assigned to an air base. So he ends up on an air base at least. So he's around planes, and he gets assigned to be a mechanic on the planes.
Oh, well, at
Yeah.
least he's close. There in Germany, or was he, did he
Yeah, in
get
Germany.
okay.
Yeah, so he still hasn't been to the US at that
Yeah,
point, right? He's
yeah.
still there in Europe, and, yeah. He doesn't go to the US until after 3 years of Army service.
And did he get out, and that's when he went to the
Yeah, that
US?
was when he
Okay.
went to the US for the first time as an adult. Yeah,
Now
uh-huh.
he ended up in, was it New York City to begin with?
Yes, so he had an Army buddy, Ira, who, had told him, "If you ever come to the US and you come to New York, please look me up." We
Yeah, but
they were
people just say that, they don't really mean that.
Right, right. I think he really did. They were really good buddies,
Yeah,
and so he did. He looked them up, and that was the first place that he had to stay, when he was in New York, and he started helping out. Ira's family had a kosher food business, and they would deliver food to, I think, like, kosher restaurants and stuff, and so
okay.
he would deliver food for them, and, that kind of thing. And so that at that point, and then his first job is so funny because he had Ira's uncle or cousin or something came over one day wearing this tie that was hand painted, and Hank just thought it was, and apparently there was the sort of a thing back then for these hand painted ties. They were
Mm.
sort of a big thing, I guess. And he thought the tie was beautiful, and Hank thought, "Hey, I could do these hand painted ties." He had a little bit of an artistic flair too.
He could do,
And so
what couldn't he do? Is what
Yeah,
my
right.
question.
Oh, I have a list. I have like this his resume of all these things that he did. It's crazy. And it's so different, everything. And anyway, he set about trying to paint Vargas girls on these ties. Now, Vargas girls were sort of like pinup girls.
Oh, I see.
And so in particular from this artist whose last name was Vargas.
Okay.
And he developed a technique for doing it where it was sort of pre-drawn on there with a very light powder that people couldn't see because he did it ahead of time. And then the tie store that hired him wanted to do the tie painting in the window of the store wearing a beret and having a little like Van Dyke kind of
Oh my gosh.
facial hair. So he was known as the European tie artist. He
Well,
ended up making a lot of good money at that, and so he was painting these ties and, made some good money and was saving up to buy a car when one day he was doing the kosher food delivery and he was on a bus and saw an airplane for sale, at the edge of an airport, and he jumps up and he tells the bus driver, "Stop! I want to get off here." And apparently they would do that back then. So he got off the bus at the airport, went and asked the guy about the plane, and he ends up buying the plane. He has no pilot's license. He has very limited experience flying. And I say limited because when he was on the air base, he would get the pilots to take him up.
oh, I
And so
see.
he went up as a passenger, and they would sometimes let him take the controls for a short time, and they would
Yeah.
show him a few things, but that was it. That was all the training he had. So that's when the flying and crashing adventures begin.
Crashing. There's
Oh
crashing.
yes, yes, he has several crashes. He has more than one crash. And one of them was just really, you could describe more as a hard landing. So his plane actually was still okay after that. But that was when, oh my God, that story is so hilarious.
This
So
the one about Texas?
it's no, it's the one
No.
through the barn. It's
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. So well, because they're on their way to Texas. So
Yeah.
tells his friend, he's wanting to fly the plane more, and his friend said, "Well, I've been wanting to go visit my family in Texas." So he says, "Okay, let's fly to Texas." And so they get in his plane, and first of all, after he fills it up at he does a refill of fuel at an airport in Ohio called Put-in Bay, which is like a island, and and there's water around the airport. And so when he filled up the plane, it was heavy with fuel, and apparently it's not a really long runway. So they're taking off, and they're at getting to the end of the runway, and they're still not real off the ground, and they're coming up on the water, and the plane is just not lifting. And so he just kind of thought, okay, I just got to give it all it's got. And he kept just going, and his friend is freaking out. His friend is like, oh my God.
This is
And
it. I'm
he's,
dying today.
yeah, he's looking at Hank like, is this normal? And anyway, so they come out over the end of the runway over the water, and he's just barely like over the water, and eventually, very slowly, the plane is going up. And
Of course
that
it
was when
does.
he figured out that was one of the things about that plane, is that it was not a really powerful engine for how heavy the plane was.
Oh, I
And
see.
so he kind of figured that out at that point. So
And at this point, he still doesn't have a license, correct?
no, he doesn't have a license, and he's never really gotten formal training. So they continued to Texas, it's overcast, and he doesn't know how to deal with overcast. I mean, the way he navigated was road maps and looking at the streets down below.
Yeah.
And so they get over Pennsylvania, and the overcast has at that point become even worse. And so now he's beginning to have trouble, and he's starting to kind of lose his which way's up and down
Sure.
kind of sense. And that you would need instrument level training for, and which he didn't have. So he ends up overcorrecting and like pulling up, which then put him into a dive. They were
Oh,
basically in
no.
a spot in a dive down, and I mean, it was like his friend was again freaking out, and stuff went flying around the cabin. And he managed to land it in this valley in Pennsylvania. It was a hard landing, but the plane was okay. And and all these farmers come running up, and they're Amish people.
Oh, no.
And they come running up, and they're like, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And he couldn't believe it because they were speaking
German.
German.
Of course they were.
And so he couldn't believe that he lands in a place where people are speaking German in the US, and he's like, "I'm Dutch." And they go, "We're Pennsylvania Dutch." And and they seemed to think that they were speaking Dutch. And he's like, "No, you're speaking German," which was true.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were disagreeing with him, and so he didn't argue with them. He's like, "Okay." And it's but anyway, that's when they end up helping him have to get out of that valley, because again, the heaviness of the plane was going to be a problem trying to get it out of that narrow valley.
Sure.
And so that's
The Pennsylvania Dutch is a common misperception, I think, because I remember my father saying that my grandmother on his side said that she was Pennsylvania Dutch, and that, but it was German that she spoke, and he was like going, I don't know, but come to find out, of course, Pennsylvania Dutch is Deutsch, which
Deutsch.
is
Yeah.
German. Yeah, it's so yeah, us silly Americans, we get things screwed up so bad, and so.
Right. Right. So
So how did he
anyway,
get out of the valley? I don't want to
oh
give
my
away everything, but
I
this is
know, it's
interesting.
so yeah, well, there the only way he was trying to figure out how am I gonna get this plane out of this valley because he had limited space to take off. And so the farmers were really nice. They put him up for a couple of nights as he tried to work it out. And so what they ended up figuring out was the only way to get speed up enough speed to get possibly up and out of the valley was to have to go through this barn that was right in the middle of the valley.
Through it.
And yeah, and so he asked the farmers real nicely, would you mind like cutting the doors bigger so I could go through the
Oh my
barn?
god.
And so on
And
top of that, he removed the passenger seat. So he had his friend actually get taken. Somebody gave him a ride to a nearby airport. Take the passenger seat out and the passenger and the luggage. And he also, after getting the plane started, removed the battery. That's what he said. He said, I
oh,
guess he
okay.
didn't really need the battery once it got started.
Well, it's like a car, same way because you have an alternator. Yeah.
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 And so that really lightened up the weight on the plane. And so he he gave it one try and he chickened out. So he didn't go through the barn that first time. He turned around then to try again. He went back as far back as he could go. And all these Amish people were, yay. It was like a show, everybody, like an air show. Everybody was there to watch.
Most excitement they've had in decades, probably.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So so then he takes off again, goes through the barn, comes out the other side, and he just barely cleared the hills on the other side and met his friend at the nearby airport. And so it was where they put the plane back together again and continued on the way to Texas. But yeah, there would be a problem again in Texas, though. So
So,
uh,
yeah, so he moves around quite a bit in the US here, right? I mean, he ends up in
yeah,
Texas and,
yeah.
whatever stories you wanna tell, these are fascinating stories. I love yeah, I wish I could have met this guy. It sounds like he is
He was
just
quite a
full of
character.
stories.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
was quite a character. And I'm really surprised that nobody decided to document his story before because just story after story was just, and I mean, none of the stories are normal stories. They're all like crazy stories. And, just how he gets through everything is just amazing. And how it's not until he comes to California that he actually gets a pilot's license. He didn't know he needed one.
oh,
So that was part of the
ignorance
problem.
is bliss, yeah,
Right. So,
that's beautiful.
yeah.
So what's he end up doing in California?
Well, it's even funny how he gets to California. How he
Oh,
gets to
okay.
California is hilarious because he wasn't headed to California. He almost ends up there accidentally. So he ends up crashing his plane in Texas. And but he was okay, and but his plane was not. So and he couldn't
Yeah.
afford to fix the plane. So he starts working in Texas, and it's Lubbock, Texas. Here is this European guy in Lubbock, Texas, which he thought was very, interesting. He's kind of again learning, through the army and through this traveling through the U.S. He's sort of learning to become American. That's the way I look at it. Is he's learning what America's about, and because he is an American, but he's
Sure.
not a practiced American,
Well,
right?
yeah,
And
and the differences between people he knew in New York City and the people in Lubbock, Texas had to be
yes, just
opposite
so
sides of the
different.
spectrum. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and, he talks about all the churches he saw in just about every corner, his first church of that, first church of that,
Mhm.
and, that kind of thing, and how he was advised to go to a church, pick a church, go to the church, and that's how you meet girls.
Uh,
So
it may be still true today, you don't know.
right, and so he hangs around there for a while and gets a drafting job, so he was a draftsman. I don't remember if I put that on that list. For a little bit, and where he meets a guy who uh, just keeps talking about Hollywood. This guy wants to go to Hollywood and become a star, and that's all the guy talks about. So Hank just listened to his stories or whatever. So then Hank finally decides he's got to leave Texas So it was very common back then to just hitchhike. If you didn't have a car or anything, you would just
Sure.
hitchhike. And so he wanted to hitchhike all the way back to New York. Well, he hitchhikes to as far as Amarillo. So I think that's where Route 66 goes through.
It's up in the
And he,
Panhandle, yeah.
and
Yeah.
he tries to uh, hitchhike towards New York. Well, he's standing out there for hours trying to hitchhike, and nobody's picking him up. And, and the sun's beating down on him. He's getting sunburned, he's sweating. And across the street, going in the other direction, one guy after another is getting picked up just like that, going west. And he's watching this going like, what's so good about that side? Why can't I get a ride going in this direction?
Well, let's go
But he
see.
keeps trying a little longer. And then he finally gives up and he goes, hell, he goes, I just don't really have anything going on necessarily in New York. I'm going to try the other side. So he goes to the other side of the street, puts his thumb in the other direction. And in no time, within a few minutes, he gets picked up by a guy and
Wow.
he's on his way to California.
So he's not with his friend that wants to go to Hollywood at all. He okay.
No, but he ends up sleeping on the couch of the guy who wanted to go to Hollywood in, when he gets to California. Not
Oh,
not right
really?
off the bat, he sleeps in a theater the first couple of nights because you could just, like, hang out in a movie theater overnight and sleep,
Oh
and
my
apparently a
gosh.
lot of guys did that. And, so it wasn't until a little bit later on that I think he called his place where he had worked in Texas, and they told him, "Hey, I can't remember the guy's name right now. He's in Hollywood. You should look him up." So he eventually hooks up with the guy and sleeps on his couch.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
He just
So
falls in it all the time. It's
he
just
does.
yeah.
And that's when he figures out that he can use the GI Bill to get his pilot's license. So he starts taking lessons at the Culver City airport, which doesn't exist anymore, but
Okay.
at the time it was there. And so he's taken lessons with this guy, and the guy's like, "Hey, you do pretty well. It seemed like you act like you have flown before."
You've done this before, haven't you?
Yeah, and Hank is like, "Yeah." It doesn't mention that he that he flew through, he like, took
I'm a
off
World
through
War
a
II
barn.
veteran. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So he finally gets his license. So but that's not what he does for a living though, is it? Or is that part of what he
Well,
does?
he's as much as he can. So what he does at first is he needs more jobs to support being able to fly. And so he gets these odd jobs and stuff. Like, for example, he becomes a dance instructor. And he used his really not exactly real diploma from high school, which is in Dutch. And he shows that at Fred Murray Dance Studio and tells them it says superior dancing knowledge or something like that.
Hey, if they can't read it, just
Really?
read it for him. It'd be all right.
Right, right. And so he gets a job teaching the jitterbug at, at Arthur Murray.
Oh
But
my gosh.
okay, so how he knew how to dance though is because once he had gotten his own place in California, his neighbor was um, Gwen Verdon, who is a famous dancer. I mean, like
Okay.
she did movies and everything. And she later married the guy who did the jazz hands guy. Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting his name right now.
I don't know.
Having a senior moment. But anyway, he's a famous jazz dancer and choreographer. And anyway, she was a famous dancer and was his neighbor, and she had already met this guy, and so she was semi-famous, but anyway, she taught him, Hank, how to dance, and so he
You can talk
loved
anybody into
dancing.
anything, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that one was a crazy little thing too. Just little details like that that just make it so funny.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me he was, teaching engineering at Caltech or something later on. I mean, it just seems like he does everything.
Right, yes. And he did also get a job as an engineer,
I
as a
see.
junior engineer at Northrop, I think it was. even though he was not an engineer. So he was kind of being a little con man there. But so what he would do is, because he didn't really know how to be an engineer, uh, he thought he could do it, but I guess what he would end up doing is he found some spot in a C, like, was it a C3? Through some plane they were building there at the time, that he found a little crevice in that he could go to sleep during the day.
And they
Yeah,
had no idea.
no, and he kept getting away with that, and being paid as a junior engineer, until one day he was walking down the hall to get to the restroom, and a real engineer asked him to calculate something for him, and
Couldn't
he
do it.
he was not successful. And he got taken straight to the personnel department to be
Oh,
escorted out.
but he was collecting a paycheck and everything. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yes.
Golly.
So anyway,
Making
uh,
your own luck. It's beautiful.
yeah, yeah. And I know that makes it sound like he's this con man. Some people don't like that, but think about what he went through when he was in hiding. I mean, you basically
Sure.
have to become a con man when you're going through that Nazi occupation. You're in
Yeah.
hiding. You have to lie. You don't even use your real name. And it's like that was, and even before he went into hiding, there was a lot of underhanded things you had to do, just dealing with the Nazi occupation. And so I kind of look at it as that. It was just, that was just what he learned, that and how he learned to live. And none of what he did as any kind of con or anything like that was really dangerous. None of it really was, like the
Yeah.
dancing thing. I mean, who's going to get hurt by
Well,
that?
he's
And
not hurting anybody. Yeah, exactly.
no, he's not hurting anybody.
But
And
growing up in his era and the things that he grew up seeing and everything, you had to be quick on your feet or you had to learn to be. And yeah, that's just part of it. When you like you said, he had to lie. He had to change
yeah,
his name. He had to do all this kind of stuff. It probably just developed a skill for it without even thinking about it. And that's just, you know,
yeah, right,
open
yeah.
doors for him.
so so anyway, there's a lot of great stories in it. I mean, I know some people will say, oh, you've told the whole story. No, I'm telling you, there are a lot of great stories in there that are
Yeah.
very entertaining, very funny. So even though the World War II part, there are many parts that are not funny at all for World War II.
Yeah.
But in there's a lot of great funny gems as well. So in that regard, it's not like one of those World War II depressing books. It has a good outcome, and it's got some amusing stories in it, uh, and it tells the truth as a witness to the things that went on in a Nazi occupied
Yeah.
country.
Yeah. And he did find the love of his life after a while too out there in California, did he not?
Yes. So in yet another one of his crashes, so he now that makes it sound like he's not a good pilot. But remember, the previous two crashes were from, that was before he was licensed, right? So
Yeah.
and he continued to practice, but he eventually, from California, some people he had met in Texas came out to visit California, and they asked him to be their chauffeur. They were wealthy,
Hmm.
and so he was their chauffeur to show them around California and such. And they brought their daughter, and they ended up getting um, engaged. So Hank has to move back to Texas. Now, this though is not who he ends up marrying. So when he's in Texas, back at Texas, one of the things he becomes is a theater owner, but that's something else. But he's still fixated on flying, so he
Uh-huh.
becomes a crop duster.
Oh, there you go. A lot of practice there. Sure.
Yes, and
Yeah.
crop dusters were crazy back then. So
Yeah.
and the thing is there weren't really there wasn't much in the way of regulations on making sure the planes were safe and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They just took these old World War II planes, and retrofitted them with
Sure.
these hoppers that were filled with, chemical poisons and stuff like that to dust over all the crops.
Of course.
And so he became a crop duster, and he would do all these crazy moves and all of that kind of thing. And anyway, so he had an engine fail on him and he crashes and he survives, but he is injured. And so he gets hauled off. That's actually the opening scene.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah. And he gets hauled off to a hospital. And but the funny thing is, though, of course, his family is like, will you stop flying now? You can see how dangerous this is. And there's just no way. He was like,
No.
no, I'm not going to stop flying. And so he's looking, as he's recuperating in the hospital, he's looking for flying jobs. And he applies for a position with TWA as a pilot. And they were also looking for fighter pilot trainers. Fighter pilot trainers.
Oh, gee.
And he's like a little crop duster, right? And so he does that, and they get back to him, and he ends up with a interview about doing the fighter pilot training. And the first guy who takes him up kind of has some reservations about it. He's like, I don't know how they fly in Holland, but
This is
I'm
not
gonna
it.
I'm gonna send you down to Alabama and let them decide, or Mississippi, wherever it was. I'm
Yeah.
gonna let them decide. So he passes that first level, and then like every level after that, that's the last part of the story, kind of before he meets Lola. Because he ends up breaking it off, by the way, with the girl from Texas.
Okay.
It's that was not going to work. She was sort of a rich, spoiled um, uh, kind of person, and
Brat.
so
Yeah, we'll go with Brat.
yeah. And so she, anyway, so he ends up going through all these levels of being tested to become a fighter pilot trainer, and he actually makes it. And I mean, even he was just totally shocked. He's like, "Oh my gosh!" And he like couldn't believe his luck. He was like, and he does feel a lot of it was lucky. He
Yeah.
felt like it's because he could dance, and there's a good story about why he felt that. And he felt like one of the testing levels was done by a Dutch guy. He goes, "I think that's why I passed that
Oh my
test."
gosh.
And then he used to copy off of this guy that sat next to him, who was the smart guy in class, and he used to
In the
just like,
training?
yes, in
Oh my
the written
gosh.
stuff, in the written stuff. And so again, he just sort of squeaked his way through, and but he managed to actually get there. And when he did, then he was absolutely determined to show that despite his kind of squeaking through the program, that he was going to be their top trainer.
He deserved to be
And
there.
his
Yeah.
first group was the top group in the
Oh,
whole
wow.
thing of, yeah.
You
So
gotta wonder if he just learned a lot of the maneuvers and stuff doing the crop dusting. Like you said, it was a lot of crazy stuff they would do, and
yeah.
that's something that an average pilot would have never even
Yeah.
attempted,
And he
so
didn't get instrument rated until that thing. That was when he first learned instrument rating,
yeah,
was
yeah,
their instrument reading or whatever, the flying, instrument flying.
yeah, the
Uh,
IFR, yeah,
yeah, IFR.
yeah.
So that's the first time he ever did it, was when he was trying out for this job. So so he was still kind of learning as he was going, and but he kept, you also get the feeling that people just must have liked him. He
I
must
like
have
him, I've never
been,
met him, I like him
yeah,
already.
yeah. So you just get the feeling all the way through that despite things going on, that people just liked him, and
Yeah.
wanted him to do well. It helps that he was very good looking too. He was,
Oh, well, there you go.
yeah,
That always does help with almost everything.
yes, it does. Yeah, yeah. And so it's
Uh,
while he is now working for this civilian contractor who is contracted by the Air Force to do this training. He did a lot of training of pilots, for example, for NATO, but also some airline pilots and such. He would train them. And um, that was when he was getting bored and he wanted to meet women, of course. And so he decided to join a community theater group that it was going on in town.
this in Alabama?
This is in Kinston, North Carolina.
North Carolina, okay.
Yeah, so now he's in Kinston, North Carolina, and this community theater was starting up. And from his experience in California, he just felt like that women who were in theater tended to be more outgoing, fun, funny and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
He enjoyed that type of woman, and so he thought he might find somebody fun to be with, and so
Mm.
he went to this theater, and that was when he met Lola. And they both ended up getting the lead. She got the female lead in the play, he got the male lead, and he had to kiss her at the end of the play. It's a cute
There you
story.
go. There you go.
Yeah.
It just sounds like a Barry Manilow song, when he met Lola, and yeah, so it's just
And he,
wow.
yeah, they eventually married, and they were married all the way up until, unfortunately, Hank passed away in 2017 at the age of 90. And
Oh,
but Lola is still with us. She's 90 right now, and
how is she
she
doing?
she's
Surrounded
doing
by
all
family?
right. Yeah, she's doing okay, and I'm helping her write her story. So
Oh, that's even better. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
so I'm writing her story right
So
now.
I th so what are the well, I had so many questions in my head as you were going. So what is her story? Is she from somewhere else too, or is she
She's from
from?
North Carolina.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
so she grew up there. And yeah, so she, the main thing about her story is, well, later in life, she became a humorist and she did a lot of professional speaking and that kind of thing. And she was very funny. As a matter of fact, she won several comedy contests. And so she's done great with comedy and humor, and it's clean humor.
Oh,
And so that's challenging to be really funny with
in
clean humor.
in
And
2020, you don't see that very often. So yeah,
no,
yeah.
and imagine her, and the opening scene with her is her in a comedy contest. So she's in a comedy contest with all these young, because usually the other people in a comedy contest are usually young people, right there,
Mm-hmm.
and young guys and stuff like that who leap up to the stage in a single bound. And she's got a limp, and she walks up there a little bit slowly, but she still kills, and she won that contest. And that was in Hollywood. That was in Burbank, actually.
How
So
long
that
ago was
was,
this?
oh, when was that? That was back in, she was in her 80s then. So it was
Oh,
probably about 7 years ago or something like that.
can you imagine though? Goodness gracious. Being
Yeah.
that age and go out there and say, "Sit down, Sonny. I'm going to tell you a joke." I think that's just awesome.
Yeah. And so she's really good. And yet she started out life challenged because she was born prematurely,
Mhm.
and she was only 2.5 pounds when she was born, and then within the first few days lost a pound. So she got
Oh my
down to a
gosh.
pound and a half. And her, basically, the doctors told her parents that she wouldn't live but more than a few weeks, and even if she did live, she would probably be severely disabled and would have to be taken care of in an institution or something.
Yeah. You
She
gotta
proved them wrong.
you gotta
and
think
and
about what year that was. I mean,
because
that would have
they did not have uh, uh, incubators back then. Well, they
yeah.
had them, they did exist, but not the hospital she was in. So in North Carolina, they didn't have them. And so they just took their little tiny baby home, and they set up a drawer. So the first line of the second chapter is, I started life in a dresser drawer. So they set up a drawer with blankets in it and put her in there with heaters in a closet, and they just kept an eye on her and took care of her.
That's
and
incredible.
and she ended up with a very weak, almost like a cerebral palsy kind of thing. So she was very weak on her left side, and she had to have lots of surgeries to correct her foot and that kind of thing. But she still, through her life, ended up having a limp most of her life. But I mean, her
Yeah.
mother just made sure she got physical therapy constantly, and just told her all the time, you can do whatever you want. And she did. I mean, she rode bicycles. She did swimming, which she could do swimming pretty well and that kind of thing. But she did have a perceptible limp. And
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
she just sounds like the kind of person just like Hank that you're not going to be dissuaded no matter what, I've got a goal or I've got a life to live here. Get out of my
yeah.
way.
Yeah, right. And so yeah, so she So she had a nice little life. She had great parents, and so that was very nice. And sounds like Kinston, North Carolina, was a nice little town to grow up in.
I
It
used
was
to
a
live
very
there, but I'm not sure where that is. I don't recognize that town. I used to live in North
oh,
Carolina, but yeah, I
I
don't.
know it's not too far from Charlotte, I think.
Oh, that may be. Yeah, I was in Eastern North Carolina, so
Oh,
near
okay.
Fayetteville. So
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Specifically, she was from, she grew up as a kid in Rocky Mount. Do you
Oh,
know?
yeah, I know where Rocky Mount is. Sure.
Kinston is where she met Hank, but she grew up in Rocky Mount.
Yeah, I think that's just north of where I was. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. So when is that book going to be done?
I don't know.
You just
I'm
start?
still in kind of the early stages. Yeah, I only
Yeah.
have like about, I don't know, 50 pages or something like that so far.
Gosh, it's writing a book is good, just got to be daunting if you've never done it before. I mean, I know
Yeah,
you've done one now, but still, it just seems like climbing Mount Everest in a pair of flip-flops. I mean,
it
like
is. It really is. I'm just
yeah,
surprised that there are so many millions of books out there. It's like, oh, that many people went through all this writing
I
a book.
know.
It's amazing.
My wife has wrote two children's books, and just that alone, I mean, they're only like 18 pages long, but
Mm,
still, it was like there was a lot of back and forth with publishers and artists, and I mean, just all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I just can't even imagine writing a book that would be for adult consumption that you would have to, you know, kind of go through people like Lynette, our previous guest, and she does all that copy editing and all that stuff, and that would be
yeah.
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 Yeah, there's a lot more to it than just sitting down at a computer and typing everything up and sending it off and having it done. So,
Yeah. And
yeah.
it's amazing uh how many times, for example, in Private Lucky, I had to read through it to make sure there were no errors. And I had three editors. So I paid one to do the whole book. I paid Lynette to do a portion of a rewrite that because I rewrote a big portion of the book at some point, and so I felt like it needed to be re-edited. So I had her do that, and then the book designer, they did an edit pass through it, and all of that. There still was an error somewhere in it. There's at least two errors
Is it
that
really?
later came out. Yeah. And they're just the kind that it's real easy to just read right over it
Yeah.
and not catch it. So it is amazing how hard that can be. Those were professional editors. And yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine once you write it and look over it, it would be very easy because you know the story. It would be
Yeah.
super easy for you yourself to just gloss over it, because you
Right.
know what it's supposed to say. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Wow. Wow.
And it's the
Well,
kind of thing that a spell check doesn't catch, it's
yeah.
because
Yeah, grammatical or whatever, or just, sometimes you put a word in front of, they have like memes I've seen where it's like, they'll put two thes in a sentence and, go back and read it. And you go through, it's like, holy cow, I didn't see that the first time. So yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
So,
incredible.
yeah.
Well, that's awesome. So she's got a lot of good stories to kind of keep you busy with all that too.
Yeah, she does, and she's I think it's even just helping her out as far as um I don't know, staying engaged because she's in an assisted living place now, and you can't go visit her or anything, either during the lockdown, and I think that's being very hard on her. Real hard for her to have any kind of visitors, and it's kind of giving her something to do. She loves it when I'm asking questions about her life and that kind of thing. And I get to hear more about her life. And,
So how do
and
you talk to her? Is it over the phone or you actually
yeah,
go?
just over the phone. Yeah.
I
And
heard that's been very, very hard on a lot of elderly people that they can't see their family and they can't, depression really sets in very easily. I know my mom
yeah,
when she got to be in her early 80s. I mean, it was like there was all kinds of, if I didn't talk to her every day, I mean, it was terrible for her. So yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And it's like even the activities at the assisted living place, they're not doing the activities. The dining room, they don't let them eat in the dining room anymore. They have to just eat in their room. So their food gets brought to them to their room. And it's very isolating. I mean, it's like they're in solitary confinement.
yeah, yeah.
And
And, You just got to wonder when it's going to end. I know they said it's going to be a month to flatten the curve and then everything will go back to normal. And here we are, however many
Yeah,
months later, 6, 8 months later.
yeah,
Yeah, well, maybe
yeah.
maybe at the end of the year, maybe everything will change, but yeah, I feel my heart goes out to some of these older people. I've got a friend from high school that her mother actually tested positive. Uh,
Ooh,
yeah, but she's been completely asymptomatic. She's 90 something years old and she's
wow, she's been asymptomatic.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So,
Oh,
and you got to wonder how often that happens. I mean, for somebody that age, I would imagine that's not very common, but it it
yeah,
it, it is for her. And yeah, I mean, you just don't know. You just don't know.
right. Anyway, Hank, I get a lot of comments on Hank's book that it needs to be a movie, and that's probably the number one comment I get. And so I am always hoping that someday, sometime, that the right person reads it uh, and agrees.
Now, your husband works in Hollywood in a picture studio, correct?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he's not kind of in that, place where he can
Yeah.
help me too much with that. He's an audio engineer for Sony Pictures, and
Oh, okay.
yeah, and
Eh,
I mean, I have actually talked to some, but I did talk to some higher level person at Sony, and they said you need to have an agent
oh, I
who
see.
is managing the story. And so I don't have an agent, at least not yet. And so we'll see.
And
Uh,
maybe if the right agent comes across it, maybe they'll do it for free and just to see it happen,
yeah,
get their residuals on the back end of it. So
yeah,
I
yeah,
see on your website you have a place where they can answer a survey about should it be a movie. So
right.
yeah, so go to privatelucky.com and there's a place down there, but right towards the first third of the website, and it says answer our survey about being Private Lucky being made into a movie. Yeah, I think it'd be a. I mean, I've seen a lot worse movies. I've seen movies with terrible storylines, and this is a
Yes,
fantastic storyline, so I don't see why it wouldn't. I think
yes.
I think it would do well.
It's one of
So
those that would be challenging because it's a sort of a long life thing, starting from when he's of a young teenager, like 13 or so, and
yeah.
um, and then going till when he gets married and everything. So but there's so many great stories, and there's just is so entertaining that I mean that's why people just say this has to be a movie.
I wonder.
When they look at the choice of movies that are out there these days, it's like this is really a great story, and it was real. It was a true story.
Yeah, yeah. I'm just thinking they could have it like Martin Sheen sitting in a recliner chair, and he's telling these stories, and then all of a sudden everything pans back, and they show the younger Hank, and then the 20-ish Hank, and then as things, and then you just kind of like hit all these story parts, just like he's being interviewed or something.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
sounds like
and
Martin Sheen would be good. He's got the hair and he's got everything, from the.
yeah, I really would like Tom Hanks to see
Oh,
this,
there
and
you go.
yeah, I think that would be good, and
Because he's aged very well like that too. I think that he would be a perfect
yeah.
role for something like that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We
And
got to
by the way, the
get him out
book's
of Greece.
available also as an audiobook now too. So we finally got the audiobook done. And the audiobook is available on Audible, Chirp Books. There's a number of distributors that have the audiobook.
Yeah, just search for Private Lucky, and you can get the book on Amazon and other
The
smaller
printed
books.
book you can get on Amazon and through bookstores, you should be able to order it. It may not be on the shelf, but you can order it because it's
Yeah.
available through Ingram Spark, which a lot of bookstores use to purchase books and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So,
Now they can order it off your website also. Is that
yeah,
true?
and, through the website. Yeah.
Okay.
hmm
Cool. Cool.
Privatelucky.com, right?
Privatelucky.com. So yeah, definitely check this book out. I mean, it's such a fantastic story, actually, I bought a copy from Melissa the last time we talked on a previous podcast, and I've gotten through part of it, and life has just been just crazy. So yeah, but yeah, but it is riveting once you start. You don't want to put it down, but I forced myself to put it down because we had stuff going on. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a There's a lot to unwrap. I mean, it sounds like she gave away the farm here, but she's, like she had said, she's just scratching the surface of a lot of these stories and some of these stories. Even from what our previous podcast covered, we didn't even cover a lot of that. So yeah,
Let me
it's
talk about the name of the book. So people
oh
ask
yeah,
me, how did it come to be named that? So first of all, lucky, right? So obvious from some of these stories that he was lucky. And in general, in my research and stuff, I found that people who survived some horrific things in World War II, all the survivors all feel like they were lucky,
hmm
because they saw millions of people die, and so they just felt like the fact that they survived was lucky. So even in a general sense, that
sure,
came into play. Private, because he always laughed himself even about how he went into the army as a private and came out as a private, even though somewhere in there he had gotten promoted to private first class, but he got demoted because the stripe for the PFC didn't fit his uniform correctly. He didn't like the way it fit his uniform. It was messing something up in his mind to try and put that extra stripe on there.
yeah,
So
that
he
fits his
never put it
style. So
on.
yeah,
Yeah. And so then he got called out on it. Like, why aren't you wearing your PFC stripe? And he says, well, it doesn't fit right. It doesn't look, and he's trying to point it out to the guy. And the guy is like unbelieving. He's just like, you are kidding me. And he goes, okay, you're you're a private again. You won't wear the PFC stripe. You're a private again. So he leaves the army as a
oh
private.
my gosh, oh my gosh. You,
So
so he was kind of fussy about the way he looked even as he got older,
yeah,
correct?
his mom had been fussy about their appearance as they grew up, and was
Yeah.
always fussing with how they looked, and they had to be clean and everything had to be. And so he kind of grew up actually, kind of being that way. He was always fussy about the way he looked. And as a matter of fact, I mean, it's funny, in the army, he was kind of vain. he, I mean, he liked the American Army uniforms a lot, but you know, the privates uniforms, where they were kind of just blah, they
Sure.
were okay, but they were a little bit blah, a little bit baggy, and so he loved the officers' uniforms. So what he would do is go get the fabric from an officer's uniform, but in the same color as the private's uniform. And
Ah.
he would have a tailor custom make a uniform for him and fit to his body exactly. And so, there he'd be lined up with all the other men, and he's obviously all, much more spiffy than all the other guys. And they would ask, Gillibart, you're looking sharp. Where'd you get that uniform? And he'd be like, standard issue, sir.
That had to be expensive on a private salary back then. I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, because he actually made a lot of money in the black market after the war, actually. And so him and his buddies, Ira, remember, they
Yeah.
got this little black market thing going where they were actually making some pretty good money pushing cigarettes and things like that, because they would,
Ah.
they would collect the cigarettes from the guys who didn't want the cigarettes, and
Oh, I
they would
see.
sell them, like, because cigarettes were in short supply, and
Yeah.
so they would sell the cigarettes, and they actually made some pretty good money. And he ended up being the only one on the base with a car. He had a car. He's a private with a car, and even officers didn't have a car. And
And he
they would,
turned down a promotion because it didn't look good on his uniform.
yeah. So, and they would even give him a hard time about that, because I mean, how could he have a car? Like, they just thought for sure it was illegal. And but
Oh
he
my
would
gosh.
prove that, and the book explains how he kind of went through all those steps to legally have a car. And
Oh
so
my gosh.
it's funny. Another one of the many funny stories.
He
So
knows how to get around the system. Yeah, yeah, he's very good with that.
yeah.
So you got to buy this book. It's Private Lucky. Go to the website privatelucky.com. Go to Amazon. Go to Audible for the audiobook. It's a fantastic story. this is a guy that I would love to have dinner with, and maybe one day. And maybe one day when we all get together again. But my guest today has been Melissa Guzetta. She is the owner of the Computer Tutor, and you said what was the website for that again?
www.computertutortraining.com.
.com. So if you need to brush up on your computer training, who could not use some kind of brushing up? And she does cover all the Microsoft stuff,
Microsoft
Excel.
stuff. Yeah. Excel,
Yeah.
Word, PowerPoint,
And
Outlook,
Excel
Access.
just makes my brain just, yeah, I just can't. I can do just about everything else, but yeah, for some reason Excel is just beyond me. So, Melissa, thank you very much for being on. This has been fantastic. I thank you for coming on. And when this turns into a movie, I'm confident that it will. I need you to come back.
Okay.
All
Okay.
right. All right. And when Lola's book comes out, please let me know too.
All right. I
You've got
will.
my email, and I would love to hear more about that. So,
Okay, great.
all right.
Thanks. Well,
Thank
I
you for being
appreciate you
on.
having me on the show. Thanks.
Well,
And
thank
good
you.
luck with your podcast. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right. You too.
All right. Bye.